So you walk up to a brick wall.
All right.
You look really closely at the mortar. You run your hand over the rough fired clay, and your brain instantly registers a very specific concept.
Absolute unyielding solidity.
Exactly. I mean, the physical feedback is immediate. Your sensory apparatus points to that wall and basically declares, there it is. That is solid stuff.
And we navigate our entire existence based on that exact assumption.
Mm-hmm.
We inherently trust that the physical floor beneath us, the chairs we sit on, the cars we drive, are fundamentally, irrevocably solid.
Right. We operate on this baseline of naive realism, assuming the universe is made of tiny, hard, immutable building blocks.
Which is incredibly intuitive, but ultimately completely wrong.
Yeah, because then you step into the world of modern quantum field theory and you cross-reference it with classical metaphysics, and that brick wall it completely dissolves into something else entirely.
It vanishes.
It really does. So if you are listening to this, you are the third person in the room with us right now. You're here because you're always hungry for a new perspective, always chasing that profound aha moment that just completely rewrites how you view reality.
That paradigm shift.
Exactly. So today we are undertaking a deep dive into the absolute foundational nature of existence. For centuries, the smartest minds on Earth thought the universe was constructed of microscopic material spheres.
Right, the whole billiard ball model.
Yeah, but modern physics has utterly dismantled that architecture.
The scientific consensus has shifted permanently away from an ontological framework based on material substance. I mean, we are no longer dealing with the universe of things. We're dealing with the universe of relations, probabilities, and dynamic information fields.
It's wild. And to guide us through this shattered illusion of solid matter, we're pulling from a remarkably ambitious stack of sources.
Very ambitious.
We're analyzing a paper by Jamie Thornberry titled Beyond Matter, a Triadic Ontology of Light, Life, and Love in Dialogue with Modern Physics, along with the author's extensive supplementary notes.
And the mission for this deep dive is to explore a staggering argument. The idea that the most mathematically rigorous, cutting-edge discoveries in quantum field theory are unintentionally proving ancient metaphysical frameworks to be entirely accurate.
Yeah, Thornberry is basically constructing a bridge between two domains that, well, post-Enlightenment society has largely treated as mutually exclusive.
Science and classical theology.
Right. The argument suggests that when physicists map the behavior of subatomic fields, they are mathematically describing the exact same underlying reality that classical philosophers mapped out conceptually thousands of years ago.
It's a bold claim.
It is. But before we really delve into the mechanics of how that bridge is built, we need to lay down a crucial disclaimer for you listening.
Yes, very important context here.
While Thornberry's sources rely heavily on Christian ontology and classical theology, our goal in this deep dive is absolutely not to take any theological sides or, push any religious agenda.
Not at all.
We are examining this impartially. We're treating this as an objective analysis of a specific interpretative framework.
Right, we're interrogating an ontological hypothesis.
Exactly. The goal is to unpack the author's argument that the dense mathematics of modern physics and the ancient vocabulary of classical philosophy are pointing at the same fundamental structure of reality, merely using different linguistic tools.
We are looking at the empirical data provided by quantum mechanics and evaluating Thornberry's claim about what that data implies for the fundamental nature of existence, completely independent of anyone's personal belief system.
Purely analytical. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core premise Thornberry presents is a complete inversion of how we experience daily life.
A total 180.
The proposition is that when you zoom in close enough on any physical object, matter as a concept disappears entirely. It just vanishes. And what remains in its place is not a smaller, denser type of stuff. What remains are patterns, information, and conceptually speaking within this specific classical framework, the metaphysical principle of love.
I mean, it sounds dangerously close to mysticism upon first hearing it.
Oh, totally.
But the burden of the paper is to prove that this triad is rigorously logically derived from the physics itself.
Right, it's not just poetry.
Exactly. But to grasp the architecture of this new framework, we first have to trace the intellectual history of what modern physics actually destroyed. We have to examine the death of solid substance and how human beings have historically tried and failed to define what reality is made of.
Yeah, the paper maps out this incredible 2,600-year trajectory of physics, illustrating how humanity has constantly shifted the analogies used to explain physical reality.
It's a progression of human thought, constantly trying to catch up to the evasive nature of matter.
So evasive. I mean, if you examine the pre-Socratic philosophers, the earliest attempts to describe the fundamental substrate of reality relied heavily on analogies of like a vital force or soul.
Right. You look at Thales, who thought everything derived from water, but imbued with a sort of motive animism, it was alive.
Yeah, and then later, as you move into Neoplatonic thought, reality was often described as an emanation, conceptualized almost like a scent radiating outward from a central perfect source, losing its intensity the further it traveled.
Which is a beautiful image, but then the scientific revolution hits.
Everything changes.
The Enlightenment arrives, and the analogies undergo this drastic mechanistic shift. The vital forces and emanations are just tossed out in favor of the fluid analogy.
The fluid analogy, which dominated for centuries, right, because it intuitively mapped onto observable phenomena before we had the instrumentation to really see deeper.
Exactly. I mean, early theories of electricity posited that it was an invisible fluid flowing from higher concentrations to lower ones.
Right, like water in a pipe.
Heat was conceptualized as caloric, which was supposedly this invisible, weightless fluid that flowed from hot bodies into cold ones.
And even light. The propagation of light was assumed to require a luminiferous ether, right?
Yes, this perfectly rigid yet frictionless fluid permeating the entire universe.
Which sounds completely contradictory.
It does, and, well, the fluid analogy ultimately collapsed under the weight of empirical evidence, culminating in the Michelson-Morley experiment, which failed to find any trace of that ether.
And that collapse forced the ultimate shift in the 19th and 20th centuries. Physics moved away from fluids and finally arrived at the concept of the field.
This is where we leave the realm of intuitive analogies and enter pure mathematical formalism. We really have to clearly delineate the rupture between classical physics and modern quantum field theory, or QFT.
Because classical mechanics implicitly relied on an ontology of solid, discrete entities.
Exactly. Classical physics assumed that the universe was populated by fundamentally substantial things. The stuff was primary, possessing inherent mass and taking up distinct spatial coordinates.
And the movement of that stuff was secondary, dictated by external forces acting upon it, like kicking a rock. The rock is the thing, the kick is the action.
Right. But quantum field theory completely inverts that hierarchy.
Yeah.
QFT tells us that the field itself is the fundamental reality.
Not the rock.
No. A field is not a material substance. It's a mathematical property, a value assigned to every single point in spacetime. It's continuous.
So what we traditionally call a particle, whether it's an electron, a quark, or a neutrino.
It is not a distinct solid entity injected into that field.
It's just a localized excitation, right? It's a quantization of the field's energy.
Exactly.
If I'm visualizing this based on Thornberry's notes, it's kind of like zooming in on a highly detailed newspaper photograph.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, from a macroscopic distance, you perceive a solid, continuous image of a face. But you zoom in, and the solid image dissolves into an array of discrete ink dots.
And classical atomism stopped right there, assuming those dots were the fundamental, indivisible building blocks.
But quantum field theory zooms in on one of those individual ink dots and finds that there's no pool of ink at all. The dot vanishes into a complex mathematical description of probabilities, wave functions, and vibrating energy states.
The deeper we penetrate the structure of physical reality, the less stuff we actually encounter. We only find structured dynamics and relational systems.
What's fascinating here is how Thornberry uses mass-energy equivalence to drive this point home. You know, E equals mc squared.
Oh, absolutely. That equation is usually colloquially understood as meaning mass can be converted into energy.
Yeah, like burning a log to get heat.
But the deeper ontological implication, which the paper really stresses, is that mass is energy. Mass is simply a measurement of the energy confined within a system.
So mass is not a foundational substance. It's just energy that has stabilized into a specific relational pattern.
Exactly.
But I have to push back on this purely abstract view on behalf of your immediate physical experience as a listener.
Okay, let's hear it.
If there is no actual stuff down there. If I am merely a localized, complex excitation in various intersecting quantum fields, and I'm currently sitting on a chair that is also merely a localized excitation in those same fields.
I see where this is going.
Why does it hurt when I forcefully stub my toe on the coffee table? If neither my toe nor the table contains any truly solid substance, what exactly is colliding?
It is the necessary grounding question for any theory that claims matter is an illusion. Thornberry addresses this by radically redefining what we perceive as physical solidity.
How so?
In this framework, mass and solidity are defined strictly as resistance within structured energy.
Resistance within structured energy. Okay, we need to explore the exact mechanism of that resistance.
When you stub your toe, you are not experiencing the collision of two solid microscopic billiard balls. The sensation of a solid impact is entirely the result of the Pauli exclusion principle operating at the quantum level.
Oh, okay.
The atoms in your toe and the atoms in the coffee table are surrounded by clouds of electrons. And electrons are a class of particles known as fermions.
Right. And fermions have a half-integer quantum spin, which distinguishes them from bosons, like photons, which have an integer spin.
Crucially, the laws of quantum mechanics dictate that no two fermions can occupy the exact same quantum state simultaneously. Their wave functions are antisymmetric.
They refuse to share space.
Exactly. So when you forcefully swing your foot into the table, the electromagnetic fields of your atoms approach the electromagnetic fields of the table's atoms. The electrons are forced into closer proximity.
And because they absolutely cannot occupy the same state, a massive repulsive force is generated.
Yes. The electrons violently repel each other to maintain their distinct quantum states. This is known as electron degeneracy pressure.
So the intense, sudden repulsion between these invisible force fields is registered by the nerve endings in my toe, sending an electrical signal to my brain, which my brain interprets as the sensation of hitting a solid object.
The pain is literally just the macroscopic interpretation of a microscopic mathematical impossibility. You cannot force those wave functions to overlap.
That is wild.
What we colloquially call matter is just a self-contained, highly stable dynamic structure violently defending its boundaries. The author insists we have to reframe our perspective.
Right, because when we look at the quantum level, we haven't discovered less reality. We have simply discovered less materialism.
Precisely. The physical world is incredibly dense, impactful, and real. It simply isn't constructed out of the naive, inert substance human intuition assumed it was.
Less reality versus less materialism.
Yeah.
That distinction completely changes the landscape. Because if we accept that there is no solid inert substance, the next logical hurdle the paper tackles is explaining how continuous vibrating movement creates the persistent illusion of a solid object.
Yep.
The text poses the question directly. How does movement become a rock?
And the radical answer Thornberry deduces from modern physics is that movement never becomes a rock. A rock is not the end product of movement. A rock is movement.
It's just highly organized.
It is a highly organized, incredibly stable, fiercely constrained system of movement.
You know, I found myself struggling to conceptualize a system of movement that masquerades as an object. And the most accurate physical analogy seems to be a whirlpool in a fast-moving river.
That's perfect.
Because if you're standing on a bridge observing the current and a large whirlpool forms, you can point to it. You can track its location. You can say there is a distinct entity. It possesses a distinct shape, a specific diameter, and it exerts a measurable force on its environment.
But if you attempt to isolate the whirlpool substance,
you find nothing but the river.
Exactly.
The water molecules constituting the whirlpool are constantly flowing in and out of it in fractions of a second. The material composition of the whirlpool is entirely different from one moment to the next, yet the whirlpool itself persists.
It's a pattern of movement that sustains its own geometry.
Right.
The paper explicitly utilizes the concept of the vortex, or the soliton, to explain this ontological shift. In physics, a soliton is a self-reinforcing wave packet that maintains its shape while it propagates at a constant velocity.
So a stable thing in our universe, whether it's an electron or a rock, behaves fundamentally like that whirlpool or that soliton.
Yes. It is a recursively sustained pattern.
A recursively sustained pattern.
Yeah.
The system feeds its output back into its input to maintain its own equilibrium.
Think about the electron again. Physicists do not describe an electron as a tiny, hard sphere. They describe it as a stable solution to a complex field equation.
It's an autopoietic system at the lowest level of reality. It constantly regenerates its own structural integrity.
The universe is a continuous ocean of interacting fields, and the macroscopic objects we interact with are incredibly complex, nested hierarchies of stable, repeating ripples that maintain their structural coherence amidst the underlying flux.
So a thing is not actually a thing. It is a persistent event.
Yes. And this forces a complete redefinition of existence itself. Within classical materialism, being, the sheer state of existing, was identified with a static, inert substance that simply occupies space.
Just dead matter sitting there.
Right. But Thornberry argues that QFT proves being must be identified with stable, intelligible patterning. To exist is to possess and maintain a stable pattern of energetic relations over time.
Okay, so physics has achieved an unparalleled mastery of mapping out the mechanics of these quantum whirlpools. We possess the gauge symmetries, the Lagrangian mechanics, the standard model equations that dictate precisely how these fields behave.
We have the map down cold.
We do. But Thornberry highlights that this very triumph of empirical physics exposes a profound, impenetrable limitation in the scientific method itself. We hit an absolute explanatory gap.
Physics is the ultimate tool for describing behavior, structure, transformation, and mathematical probabilities. It can detail the exact cross-section of a particle collision, calculate the magnetic moment of an electron to startling precision, and predict how much energy is released when a structural pattern breaks down.
It provides the ultimate map of the how.
Yes, but the methodological silence occurs when we shift from the how to the why.
Because physics cannot explain why structure exists as a fundamental property of reality. It cannot explain why stability emerges from fluctuating quantum fields in the first place.
Why do the laws of physics hold true universally? Why do these intricate relational structures cohere into complex atoms, molecules, and eventually biological organisms instead of instantly collapsing back into a state of maximum entropy and chaotic noise?
And perhaps the most jarring question: why is the universe fundamentally intelligible to human rational inquiry?
Exactly. Why does mathematics, a purely formal system of logic constructed by the human mind, correspond so flawlessly to the physical behavior of the universe? Eugene Wigner famously called this the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics.
I anticipate a lot of scientifically minded listeners might push back on this premise.
Oh, absolutely.
They might ask, does physics actually need to answer the why? If we possess the mathematical framework of the how, and that framework allows us to split the atom, engineer semiconductors, and launch deep space probes, isn't that sufficient?
The shut up and calculate interpretation.
Yeah, many physicists subscribe to that interpretation of quantum mechanics, arguing that instrumentalism is the only valid goal. Just make the predictions.
This raises an important question regarding the limits of epistemology. The strict instrumentalist approach is highly pragmatic, but Thornberry argues it leaves our understanding of reality ontologically incomplete.
We are conflating the ability to manipulate a system with the ability to comprehend the system's foundational nature.
Exactly. The questions of why structure exists and why the universe is intelligible are not empirical questions that can be resolved by building a larger particle collider.
You can't just smash things together harder to find the answer.
No, they are foundational questions about the preconditions of existence itself.
So physics has to smuggle in a massive set of unproven assumptions just to begin doing physics.
Precisely. The scientific method presupposes the stability of structures. It presupposes the consistency of natural laws over time and space. It presupposes that the human mind is capable of accurately interpreting sensory data and mathematical logic.
It takes all of that for granted.
Yes, physics utilizes these concepts, but it cannot explain the ontological conditions that make those assumptions possible. If we rely solely on the mathematics of QFT, we're in the position of someone who has meticulously deduced all the rules of chess by watching pieces move on a board.
Okay, I like this analogy.
We know how the knight moves. We understand the strategic value of the center squares. But we have absolutely no mechanism to explain why the game of chess was invented, why the board consists of 64 squares instead of 100, or what prevents the physical board from spontaneously disintegrating mid-match.
We possess the syntax of the universe, but physics cannot provide the semantics. It gives us the structure, but not the meaning or the cause of the structure.
And because physics hits this hard epistemological wall regarding the underlying why, Thornberry argues we are forced to cross a metaphysical bridge.
Right.
If the empirical sciences can only map the relations between phenomena, we must look to philosophy to understand the ontological grounding of those phenomena. And this is where the paper makes its most fascinating historical pivot. It returns to classical antiquity.
This is where it gets crazy. We're taking the most advanced concepts of 21st century quantum field theory and mapping them directly onto ancient Greek philosophy.
Specifically, the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition.
The lineage of thought originating with Aristotle and heavily refined by Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century.
Thornberry's thesis is that this specific metaphysical tradition developed the precise philosophical framework required to answer the exact why questions that currently plague quantum mechanics, and they developed it centuries before the scientific method even existed.
The analogy that clarifies this for me is examining the relationship between software and hardware. Imagine a brilliant theoretical computer scientist living in the 1800s.
Okay.
They write a comprehensive, flawless textbook on the underlying logic gates required for an advanced operating system to function. They map out the Boolean algebra, the required memory allocation structures, the necessary binary state transitions.
Right, all the theory.
Yeah, and they do all of this without ever having seen a silicon microchip, a transistor, or a screen. They don't know what physical material will run the system, but they perfectly deduce the logical requirements for the system to exist.
That's a great way to look at it.
And then centuries later, we build the physical hardware, the quantum fields and particle interactions, and we realize it operates exactly according to the logical architecture mapped out in that old textbook.
The Aristotelian Thomistic philosophers did not know about gauge bosons or strong nuclear forces, but they understood the strict ontological requirements for anything to exist at all.
The source material distills this classical tradition down to 3 key principles that perfectly anticipate the discoveries of modern physics.
The first principle is intelligibility, often referred to in classical terms as form.
Right form.
Classical metaphysics argues that reality is inherently structured in such a way that it can be comprehended by a rational intellect. In Thomistic thought, a physical object is a composite of matter and form, a concept known as hylomorphism.
Hylomorphism. Okay, break that down.
Matter is pure, undetermined potentiality. Form is the intelligible principle that actualizes that matter, giving it specific structure and making it a distinct thing.
So when a physicist writes down a wave equation that perfectly describes the probability distribution of an electron,
they are implicitly confirming the Aristotelian concept of form. The fact that the physical universe can be seamlessly translated into the conceptual language of mathematics proves that the universe possesses an inherent foundational intelligibility. It is structured to be known.
Wow. Okay, so the second classical principle is being as act, which directly addresses the dynamic nature of existence. And this maps perfectly onto our discussion of the whirlpool and the solitone from earlier.
Exactly. Aristotle and Aquinas fundamentally rejected the idea that being is a static, resting state. They divided reality into potentiality and actuality. To exist is to be in act.
So the substance of an entity is not a chunk of dead matter.
No, it is the entity's continuous dynamic act of existing. This classical concept is indistinguishable from the QFT view of reality as active, relational fields where particles are just continuous actualizations of field potential.
And then the third classical principle is unity, or the coherence of multiplicity.
For any entity to exist as a singular, distinct thing, rather than a random aggregate of parts, it must be unified by a higher-order principle of coherence.
Thomism calls this the substantial form.
Right. An atom is not simply a pile of protons, neutrons, and electrons sitting near each other. It is unified into a single functioning system possessing properties that do not exist in the isolated components.
It's irreducibly complex. It cannot be explained merely by listing the parts.
Exactly.
So we have these 3 foundational pillars from antiquity: intelligibility, or form, dynamic existence, or being as act, and unity.
And this is the precise moment in the text where Thornberry takes a massive conceptual leap.
The midward.
The author takes this Aristotelian Thomistic foundation and integrates it into a specific Christian ontological framework, proposing a triad that serves as the ultimate metaphysical grounding for quantum physics.
And that triad is light, life, and love.
Yes. The paper constructs a direct, rigorous mapping between the physical phenomena described by QFT, the classical metaphysical principles, and this theological triad. We really need to examine each component systematically to understand how the author justifies this synthesis.
So what does this all mean when we start with the first part of the triad, light? Because we're obviously not talking about physical photons emitted from a light bulb here.
No, not at all.
How does the concept of light map onto the mathematics of quantum fields?
In this specific ontological framework, light represents the principles of truth, revelation, absolute knowability, the foundational intelligible structure of reality. Metaphysically, it corresponds directly to the classical principle of form we just analyzed.
Okay.
Physically, Thornberry argues that light corresponds directly to the scientific concepts of fields and information.
Now, we have to clarify the use of information here, because in physics, information theory usually refers to Shannon entropy, the quantifiable reduction of uncertainty in a system, regardless of whether the data actually has meaning.
That's a vital distinction. Thornberry is blending Shannon information with semantic information. The fundamental fields of the universe carry information. The structure of the vacuum state, the coupling constants of the forces, the mathematical symmetries, these are all information.
Right.
The argument is that without the foundational principle of light, without this inherent, omnipresent intelligibility fields would be entirely unknowable. Structure could never be distinguished from pure chaotic noise.
So the very act of scientific observation would collapse.
Because there would be no coherent information for the observer to receive or process.
You know, I think of light as the fundamental operating system, or perhaps the universal Wi-Fi signal.
The Wi-Fi signal, I like that.
It is the hidden, pervasive infrastructure that allows data to be formatted, transmitted, and decoded. If you lack the Wi-Fi signal, your advanced smartphone is reduced to a useless rectangle of glass and silicon. Without the ontological principle of light, the universe is merely a void of unintelligible static. Physics proves that highly ordered structure exists. The light framework provides the philosophical reason why that structure is fundamentally legible to us.
The limitation of the Wi-Fi analogy, though, is that Wi-Fi is an external signal interacting with an independent device. In this ontology, light constitutes the very fabric of the device itself.
Ah, right. It's built in.
Furthermore, Thornberry notes a profound epistemic consequence here. This concept of light provides a rigorous grounding for human cognition.
Okay, unpack that.
Think about it. Why can a primate brain, evolved for survival in the African savanna, accurately calculate the orbital mechanics of a black hole billions of light years away?
It is kind of absurd when you frame it like that.
Evolutionary biology cannot fully account for the mind's ability to grasp abstract, universal truths like that. But if human consciousness and the physical universe are both derived from and participate in the exact same principle of intelligibility light, then cognition is not a fortunate biological accident.
The mind can read the physical universe because the universe is fundamentally written in light.
Precisely.
That reframes human intelligence entirely. It makes epistemology a physical science. But a field of pure information, a universal Wi-Fi signal, isn't enough to build a tangible universe.
No, it's not.
Information is abstract until it is instantiated. How does this theoretical light coalesce into something that persists in time and space? How do we get from a field equation to a stable quantum state?
That necessitates the second principle of the triad, life.
Life.
If light provides the underlying mathematical structure and knowability, the field and the information, then life corresponds to the actualization of that structure.
Life represents the stable, enduring patterns that emerge within the field.
Yes.
But the word life carries immense baggage. When the average person hears life, they default to biology. They think of cellular respiration, DNA replication, photosynthesis, organic reproduction.
Of course.
We must explicitly define how Thornberry is using this term in a physics context.
The text explicitly demands that we expand our ontological vocabulary here. Biological life is merely one highly specific, incredibly complex subset of a much broader metaphysical category.
So what is ontological life?
Ontological life signifies self-organizing structure, active persistence through temporal change, and dynamic coherence. It is the principle of being as act.
Wait, are we seriously suggesting that a rock or an individual electron is literally alive? If I drop my keys on the floor, I'm not interacting with a living organism.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we must distinguish between biological life and ontological life. An electron does not possess biological traits. It does not metabolize energy or undergo mitosis.
Okay.
However, it absolutely manifests the foundational principle of life.
Explain the exact mechanism of how an electron demonstrates the principle of life.
Let's return the concept of the soliton or the autopoietic system.
Yeah.
An electron is subjected to constant interactions with the quantum vacuum, right? It's constantly exchanging virtual photons.
It's in a chaotic environment.
Extremely chaotic. Yet it aggressively maintains its precise rest mass, its exact electrical charge, and its half-integer spin. It resists entropy. It maintains its structural integrity despite being embedded in that chaos.
It exhibits persistence through change.
Exactly. An atom is an even more complex structured system that maintains a dynamic internal equilibrium. Thornberry's radical conclusion is that biological life, like a single-celled paramecium or a human being, is not a random anomaly.
Because we typically view the universe as a vast, sterile, dead expanse of space and rock, where biological life accidentally sparked into existence as a bizarre anomaly on one specific planet.
Right, but Thornberry completely inverts that narrative. Biological life is not an accident that happened inside dead matter. Rather, biological life is simply the highest, most complex macroscopic expression of the exact same principle of dynamic persistence that creates matter at the subatomic level.
Matter is not dead.
Matter is a rudimentary manifestation of the principle of life. The universe is inherently dynamic, self-organizing, and anti-entropic from the very bottom up.
The universe is practically vibrating with the ontological principle of life at every scale. An electron is just a microscopic testament to the universe's inherent drive towards self-organization.
Yes.
But this brings us to a massive structural problem. We have the knowable quantum field mapped by light. We have the localized, stable excitations within that field mapped by life. But the universe isn't just isolated particles sitting in a void.
No, these particles interact.
They form insanely complex architectures.
Yeah.
What prevents these dynamic patterns from simply repelling each other or flying apart? What fights the ultimate cosmological tendency toward disorder and maximum entropy?
We require a binding force.
Yeah.
And here's the culmination of the framework. The third principle in this triadic ontology, the ultimate binding force, is love.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and simultaneously where it encounters the most resistance. Because using a word like love in the hyper-rational, mathematically rigorous realm of particle physics sounds absurd to the modern ear.
It sounds like attempting to solve a differential equation with a Hallmark greeting card.
Exactly. We have to completely strip away the romantic, emotional, anthropocentric definition of love here.
We must completely separate the metaphysical principle from human sentimentality. In this strict ontological framework, love is not an emotion. It is the ultimate principle of relational coherence.
Relational coherence.
It is defined as the force that unifies diverse elements into a higher order whole without collapsing their individual distinctions. It sustains complex coherence across multiplicity, ordering relational interactions toward systemic harmony rather than destructive chaos.
Okay, let's ground this directly in the physics. How does Thornberry justify mapping the concept of love onto fundamental physical forces?
Consider the strong nuclear force.
Okay.
The nucleus of an atom is packed with protons. Protons all carry a positive electrical charge. According to the laws of electromagnetism, those protons should violently repel each other, instantly tearing the nucleus apart.
Right. The universe should consist of nothing but isolated hydrogen atoms.
But the strong nuclear force overpowers the electromagnetic repulsion, binding the protons and neutrons tightly together.
But exactly how it binds them is the crucial part, right?
Yes. It operates through the constant exchange of gauge bosons called gluons. These gluons carry color charge, constantly shifting between the quarks that make up the protons and neutrons. This furious relational exchange binds the particles together into a nucleus.
Okay.
But crucially, and this is where the definition of love applies, the strong force unifies the quarks without destroying their distinction. The up quarks remain up quarks. The down quarks remain down quarks.
Ah, I see.
If the force were merely aggregative, it would crush the particles into a singular, undifferentiated point, like a microscopic black hole, destroying all information in distinction.
Wow. A black hole unifies by obliterating distinction. Metaphysical love unifies by preserving distinction while creating a higher order harmony.
Precisely. The strong nuclear force, electromagnetic binding, even gravity physics can describe the mathematics of these interactions. But physics cannot explain why the fundamental nature of reality leans heavily toward the formation of complex, stable, relational systems instead of dissolving into a soup of disconnected energy.
And Thornberry argues that these fundamental physical forces are the physical empirical manifestations of the deeper ontological reality of relational coherence.
The framework designates this principle as love. Love provides the absolute ontological grounding for why the universe holds together at all.
It's the ultimate foundational architecture of relationality. I mean, if an oxygen atom and two hydrogen atoms bind together to form a water molecule, they maintain their unique identities. They don't cease being oxygen and hydrogen, but they enter into a unified, harmonic relationship that produces entirely new emergent properties that none of them possessed individually.
That molecular bonding is the ontological principle of love operating at the nanoscale.
That is just wow.
When we synthesize the entire triad, we are presented with a breathtakingly elegant model of existence. We can map the concepts directly.
Okay, let's hear the summary of the mapping.
Light corresponds to the omnipresent field and its inherent intelligibility. Life corresponds to the localized pattern, the actualization of being. And love corresponds to the coherence, the relational binding forces.
Light, life, love, field, pattern, coherence, intelligibility, actuality, unity.
Translated into a single, comprehensive metaphysical statement, reality exists as a fundamentally knowable structure, which is light.
Right.
That structure manifests itself as stable, dynamic being, which is life. And that multiplicity of being is sustained and elevated through coherent relation, which is love.
The framework is just mathematically and philosophically cohesive. It resolves the explanatory gaps that physics currently ignores.
It really does.
But, mapping out a theoretical ontology is primarily an academic exercise unless we interrogate the practical results. Now that we've thoroughly explored this intersection of QFT, classical holomorphism, and the light-life-love triad, we have to ask the ultimate question for you, the listener.
The so what question.
Exactly, so what? How does adopting this specific framework change our perception of human existence?
The author details several profound implications, and the first is an absolute, uncompromising rejection of reductionist materialism.
Which is huge, because reductionism is basically the prevailing philosophy of the modern era. The idea that you can understand anything simply by breaking it down into its smallest parts and assuming those parts are devoid of inherent meaning.
Right. Thornberry dismantles reductionism. If physical matter fundamentally reduces to highly structured energy fields, and that structure implies an inherent underlying intelligibility light, then we can no longer dismiss reality as a collection of blind, meaningless material forces.
You can't claim that human beings are nothing but atoms, and atoms are nothing but dead, meaningless stuff.
Because atoms are not dead, meaning order and relationality are mathematically and physically baked into the very bottom layer of existence. The universe doesn't just possess mass and charge, it possesses an architecture of inherent meaning.
That drastically alters how we view our place in the cosmos. We are not an accident in a meaningless void.
No, we're not. And the second major implication the paper outlines deals with epistemology, how we justify what we know to be true.
Right, because in a purely materialist universe, truth is often relegated to a subjective human invention, right? Like a useful evolutionary adaptation for survival.
But in the triadic framework, truth is an objective reality. Truth is defined strictly as an alignment with the real foundational structure of the universe, an alignment with light.
So when your mind grasps a mathematical theorem or discovers a law of physics, your cognition is literally synchronizing with the underlying architecture of reality.
Exactly. And error, falsehood, or delusion is a physical and conceptual misalignment with that structure.
Consciousness, therefore, is not a freak biological byproduct. It's the universe's inherent intelligibility finally achieving the capacity to recognize itself.
Yes.
But the third implication is the one that directly impacts daily human behavior. Thornberry derives a comprehensive moral ontology directly from this physics-based framework. How exactly does one extrapolate morality from quantum field coherence?
It connects directly back to the principle of love, defined as relational coherence. If coherence is the foundational force that sustains reality, if it is the literal mechanism that prevents atomic nuclei from exploding and complex systems from decaying into entropy, then alignment with coherence is the definition of objective flourishing.
The goal of love is to foster and sustain relational harmony.
Right.
So if I make a choice in my daily life that actively builds harmony, resolves conflict, unifies a community, or sustains a healthy relationship, I am not merely adhering to a culturally constructed ethical norm.
No, you are literally aligning your actions with the foundational physics of the universe.
Yeah.
You are practicing ontological love.
The micro-level physics of particle binding and the macro-level ethics of human behavior are operating on the exact same underlying principle.
It's beautiful. Furthermore, this provides a profound definition of evil.
Okay, let's explore that.
In classical theology, heavily utilized by Thornberry, evil is not a substance. It is a concept known as privatio boni, the privation of good.
So evil doesn't actually exist on its own.
Evil has no ontological existence of its own. It is strictly a parasite on the good. In this framework, evil is defined precisely as the breakdown of relational coherence.
I frequently think of this in terms of architectural structural integrity.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Morality is not a list of arbitrary punitive rules designed by human authorities to restrict freedom. Morality is the structural engineering code of the universe.
Exactly.
Choosing love is the act of maintaining the steel beams, securing the rivets, and pouring solid concrete. It keeps the building strong, unified, and capable of weathering stress.
And choosing evil.
Choosing evil is not building a dark building. It's actively taking a sledgehammer to the support columns. It's introducing rust into the rebar. Evil is the intentional introduction of entropy and the absence of structural integrity.
That analogy perfectly captures the concept of privation. A hole in a shirt is not made of whole material. It is the violent absence of the fabric. Evil is the active destruction of love.
Wow.
What makes Thornberry's synthesis so compelling is that it does not attempt to overwrite or refute empirical physics. It fully embraces the standard model in QFT.
Right. It doesn't say physics is wrong.
No, physics proves that reality is fundamentally relational, intelligible, and structurally sustained against entropy. This classical triad simply provides the necessary philosophical vocabulary to understand why the math works and how human consciousness and morality are embedded in that same mathematical reality.
We have traversed an immense intellectual landscape today. We began by confronting the illusion of the brick wall, realizing that the naive solidity we rely on is actually an intense mathematical repulsion between quantum states.
We trace the history of human thought, from vital souls to continuous fields, discovering that matter is not a substance, but a highly constrained, recursively stable pattern of energy.
We examine the hard limits of the scientific method, acknowledging that physics can map the how of these stable patterns, but remains entirely silent on the why.
And we cross the bridge back to Aristotelian alomorphism, finding that ancient philosophy perfectly anticipated the ontological requirements of modern quantum mechanics.
And we unpack the profound elegance of the triadic framework. The universe is grounded in light, the field of pure information and intelligibility. It manifests as life, the dynamic, self-organizing persistence of structure.
And it is entirely sustained by love, the ultimate relational coherence that binds multiplicity into harmony without destroying individual distinction.
If human consciousness is our specific mechanism for participating in the light of intelligibility, and if our ethical choices to foster unity are our mechanism for aligning with the love of relational coherence, then human beings occupy a profoundly active role in the cosmos.
We are not passive, accidental observers staring out at a dead universe. We are the precise, localized intersections where the physical universe finally achieves conscious awareness of its own underlying nature.
Every time you push yourself to comprehend a complex truth, and every single time you choose to act with relational coherence toward another human being, you are not merely participating in sociology.
No, you are literally enacting the fundamental foundational laws of physical reality on a conscious, macroscopic level.
The next time you walk up to a brick wall, run your hand over a wooden desk, or feel the sudden, intense repulsion of stubbing your toe on the coffee table, don't write it off as an encounter with dead, meaningless stuff. You are interacting with a miracle of highly organized movement, humming with intelligible information, fiercely fighting for its own existence against the pull of entropy, and held together by the ultimate principle of relational coherence. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.